What we're going to do tonight is pick up on our lesson on Song of Songs. And because the section of material that I ran into on these pretty much 3 verses that we're dealing with, again, it has to do with the voice of the turtle dove, the blossoms have appeared in the land. What I found is that in terms of prophecy, these few verses are really viewed like you would take an old-fashioned telescope and kind of, you could compact it and you could see what's right there, but then you could stretch it out too, and you're looking at the same thing, but it really stretches your view. And so what we're going to do is do 2 lessons this week on the Song of Songs, so that I can keep a lot of that material together that has to do with the footsteps of Messiah. The prophecies embedded in these few verses about the footsteps of Messiah is extensive. And I really couldn't find, a good place to just kind of chop it off midway. So I thought, okay, we'll go ahead and do a wider lesson this week. And even doing 2 lessons, we're not going to get the 3rd part of it. That'll have to wait until next week. Like I say, because this particular section of prophecy, it just starts stretching on you. And it'll take you all the way from Egypt to Babylon and the Second Temple, and then even to the footsteps of Messiah, which I think are near based on what the rabbis are applying in terms of interpretation. Some of the things I'm going to read you tonight and tomorrow, they're going to sound very much like our headlines today. It's going to sound like they were watching the evening news a long time ago, which some things don't change much. That's what we find out. Every generation, we would like to think we've learned from the previous one, but as it turns out, not so much. And especially now where we're in a climate of trying to censor anything that assaults our sensibilities or our sensitivities. But see, if you censor out the information, then you don't know what the mistakes were that were made before, so that you know not to repeat them. And this is the message of the Bible. I mean, they record the good, the bad, the ugly. And we're told this is for our instruction. It's not so you'll go back and repeat the same mistakes. It's so you'll learn from those mistakes. So let's just go ahead and jump into it and get as much done as we can tonight. And then we'll get as much done as we can tomorrow. And then next week, like I say, it'll still continue to be very heavily, not just prophetic, but even apocalyptic. It's going to sound very much like the book of Revelation. So we're going to try to unpack some of that. I'm not telling you I've got the secret code to Revelation, but I'm telling you the scripture has the secret code to Revelation. And if we're patient enough to take it bite by bite, I think eventually we'll assemble a much better picture of what John was trying to tell us. So let me share my screen. And I'm guessing we'll just stick with what we do tonight and what we do tomorrow. We'll just say that those 2 lessons constitute lesson 48, because I did want to keep all that information together. We don't usually do something that is this heavily in prophecy, although you might disagree. It does seem like we end up in prophecy every week, but I don't know if to this extent. So here's the verse we're working with to begin with, and the fig, you will see the fig as the thread that kind of maintains its position through these 2 lessons, tonight's and tomorrow's. But I want you to add to your journal, your diary, however you're keeping it, a notebook. Or I've asked you before, if you can, if you don't know these biblical symbols or metaphors as we work through them, go ahead and write them down, because they'll be good till the end of the book. And that's part of the point of taking you to Revelation, is you're going to see that the same things that Isaiah says about the fig tree are going to be the same things that John says about the fig tree, except once we know what the context is of the fig tree and what the unripened fruit represents, then when we get over to the book of Revelation and it talks about the unripened fruit being blown off in the apocalypse, then we know exactly who those unripened figs, this is going to be a challenge tonight, those unripened figs are. They have a specific identity. And so here's the verse we're going to start with, 2:13. It says, the fig tree has ripened its fruit, and the vines and the blossom have given forth their fragrance. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. So we've already unpacked some of this in the last couple lessons. We already have a context for this in Egypt. And we're going to add to that. We're going to add to our context in Egypt. And then we're going to skip it forward 40 years. And then eventually we're going to skip it forward to Babylon. And then we're going to skip it up into Revelation. That's the plan. And so here's some key texts. If we don't cover them all, and we probably won't, because I don't think we'll even get to Matthew chapter 24 until next week. But Yeshua talks about the parable of the fig tree in Matthew chapter 24, and he gives us extensive information surrounding the surrounding circumstances at these particular days that we would associate with the footsteps of Messiah. Because when we match what Yeshua is saying against how the rabbis are interpreting our verses here in the Song of Songs, then when Yeshua makes a statement like, you will know that he is near even at the gate, then you will have heard that before. Messiah being at the gate, and how they have analyzed these footsteps. We might also call them the Chevle Shel Mashiach. If you've ever heard that term before, it's the birth pangs of the Messiah. So when you hear footsteps of the Messiah, birth pangs of the Messiah, certain teachers, they'll just stick with the Hebrew and say Chevle Shel Mashiach. It's all kind of the same thing. They're all talking about particular circumstances that will signal to a generation that Messiah is near, even at the door. So if you have time in between tonight and tomorrow, the whole chapter of Revelation 6, in fact, the whole book of Revelation, actually, we just skip all through there back and forth. There's so many themes that connect it, but especially Revelation chapter 6, Matthew chapter 24, and then Isaiah chapter 34. We're going to get some keys from the Midrash on these verses from the Song of Songs. And it has to do with in general, commentary on the fig tree as prophetic of the footsteps of Messiah. And not just of the footsteps of Messiah, it's telling us what's going on in Israel. I mean, that's who it's going to make a difference to for people who aren't even looking for Messiah or who are trying to make Messiah in their image. This information is not going to be relevant because they're going to reject it. They're not in a obedience mode. Messiah is looking for people in obedience mode when he returns, and that seems to be the point of much of the tribulation, is to bring about repentance and obedience so that you could actually hear those footsteps. Otherwise, you might mistake them for something else, or you might be looking for something else. again, that's based on your own image of what you've made Messiah into, rather than what he was prophesied to be. So as it concerns prophecy, apocalyptic expectation, this passage right here that concerns the fig tree, it's going to be very heavy. Be very heavy lessons, I think. At least they were to prepare. So just kind of a glimpse at where we're going, a quote out of Matthew 24:32. Yeshua says, learn the parable from the fig tree. As soon as its branch has become tender and sprouts its leaves, you know that summer is near. And then later, probably next week when we get into Matthew 24, he's going to make a strange comment. He's going to say, pray that your flight is not in the summer. Now there's another place where he says, pray that your flight be not in winter. And then over here, and I actually pulled the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew off my shelf, and I looked this verse up, and whoever translated it into English left off the last part of that verse. Just completely leaves off, the part about the summertime, which is stav in Hebrew. And that got my curiosity. Why would the translator leave that out for English readers? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but it's interesting. But the prophecy of the unripe figs in Revelation is going to be in the context of those 4 riders of the 7 seals. And we're going to take a look at that chiastically. Baruch Hashem has some students send me a new menorah, so I will be ready for the chiasm. And this one is, I don't know if it's lucite, I forget what it's made of, much lighter. But when you're trying to understand a chiasm, it just helps if you have one of these, even if it's cut out of your Creation Gospel workbook. If you just cut it out yourself, you can pull menorah up, you can Google it, you can print off a blank, cut it out, and just have one handy. So when you start thinking in terms of chiasms, you'll have one you can pull out and work with it a little bit, because you might come up with some chiasms that we haven't looked at yet. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the prophecy of the unripe figs in Revelation in their proper context, which does have to do with the 4 riders of the 7 seals. So here's your symbols that I think will be good if you don't already have them in your notebook. And these symbols we're taking out of Isaiah 34, which the commentaries are connecting this passage in Song of Songs to Isaiah 34. So nations and people will be the equivalent of mountains, and the figs and the leaves are going to be the equivalent of the stars and the lights of heaven. And once you make that connection, then when you do get over into Revelation 6, and it talks about, something falling like unripe figs, the stars falling like unripe figs, then you'll know exactly where you read that before. You read that in Isaiah 34. It's referenced more obliquely in the Song of Songs, but it's a nice connection to have. Nations and peoples, most people kind of get, oh yeah, when it says mountains, it's often referring to nations and peoples, but we don't always get that figs and leaves are the equivalent of stars and lights of heaven. So let's take a gander at that. Oh, just to refresh your memory on the 4 horses, I'm going to turn the sounds off. You can see how that first horse, as he rides out, of course, he rides out with the first seal, but then he would also be moving with the 7th seal. That second horse, the red horse, he would move out with the 2nd seal. He would continue moving there with the 6th seal. As the black horse rides out, he would ride out with the 3rd seal, but he would continue his revolution going through the 5th seal. And of course, which horse represents everything. The white horse, the red horse, the black horse, it all comes out of the middle. It comes out of the pale horse, which is death. So whether you're looking at war, sword, famine, plague, all of that comes from the realm of death. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for just a second. And I'm going to give you the more manual explanation of what you just saw in motion. When we read in Revelation 6, it's telling us about 4 horses: a white horse, a red horse, a black horse, and a pale horse. You only get 4. If you don't understand the chiasm, then it feels like something is left loose. Like, why did you tell me about 4 horses? And the 4 altered judgments is what they represent. Why did you tell me about 4 when clearly the text is describing 7 seals? Why would you have only 4 horses for 7 seals? Well, for just that reason. Because when you see the menorah in its circular motion, which the Garden of Eden and the way those rivers flowed, that's your pattern for how this works. If you're looking at just the menorah, like say the menorah in the temple or the tabernacle, you're looking at the lower half of the menorah. But if you look at a rainbow, then you can see the upper half of it. You can see the part that can't be seen unless you're viewing it through droplets of moisture. And so it's actually the moisture, it's the rain, represented by the Torah, by the way. It refracts that white light into the colors of the rainbow. And at that point, you can see what's not there, which was our theme last week. How can you see what you can't see? Well, if you eat Hebrew food, then you can see what you can't see. You will see on a normal day what most people only see after a rain shower. And that should be their clue that there's more out there. So at any rate, if let's say this is the white horse, you can start at any side. Let's say this is the white horse right here. So when he rides out, of course, he's going to go in that circular motion. He'll be going like that. And then your red horse, he'll be going like that. And then your black horse, he'll be going like that. So the white horse, seal number 1, seal number 7. Red horse, seal number 2, seal number 6. Black horse, seal number 3, seal number 5. But the axis, the thing that everything hinges on, is the pale or the ashen horse. In Hebrew, if you take the Greek chloros, the color of the horse is a yellowish green. You take it back into Hebrew, and it's the color of leprosy. So it's taking you back to the plague. Again, it's taking you back to death, representing something that would separate you from the camp. But that's when you're looking at a chiasm, you're going to find matching things here. So what you want to do is once you find those pairs, and this will happen in the text as well, not just in pictures like horses or in the rivers of Eden. The text itself is written in chiasms. The book of Revelation, the entire book is a chiasm. The book of Daniel, the entire book is a chiasm. So that's just a pattern of scripture. If you're going to add that to your arsenal, then you've got another way. Sometimes if you're reading a passage and you say, well, what's the point of this? I keep seeing like matching things, but they're kind of spread out. See if you can find this pattern. And if you can work your way back with these patterns, then you can find the middle of it. And once you found the axis of it or the middle of it, you found the seed idea. You found the main idea of that axis. Okay, I see you're getting information here on how to get a hold of these. I think Hebraic Roots Network is also interested in these. I haven't had a chance to email anybody much this week, but they are interested. Plus, what I like about this is I could get through TSA. I'm not sure I could get through TSA with that metal one. It's more like a pitchfork. Okay, let me go back and share my screen again now that we've had our mini lesson on chiasms. And we'll get past these little horses here. So let's read the context of the horses. We're not going to reread the horses right now. I want you to see the context in which the horses appear, because remember, our theme is the figs, the fig tree blossoming. So Revelation 6:12 says, I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became as black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. All right, that's the section of text that's going to relate back to the Song of Songs and to this other text in Isaiah. You get the context. I want you to file away that it's a thick darkness. It's a darkness that's so thick, it's described as sackcloth made of hair. It's trying to make it tangible for you. And it says the stars of the sky fell to the earth. And then it's giving you a simile here. The stars of the sky falling to the earth is going to be like a fig tree dropping its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. Now, kind of scoot back into our lessons on the four winds. We know who controls the four winds. We also know who was supposed to be part of that great divine machine as it concerns the angels of the four winds. And so when the angels of the four winds turn loose and they start allowing those four winds to generate the chaos that precedes or is part of the footsteps of Messiah, then dropping this information in here is to let you know specifically at this point, these are the footsteps of Messiah. When you see this, this is the footsteps of Messiah. It says the sky was split apart like a scroll when it's rolled up, and every mountain and every island was removed from its place. Okay. With your notes, you know that mountains can represent nations and islands can represent smaller representations. Back then, it would maybe would have been a city state. We don't have city states anymore, I don't think. Maybe Monaco. Can't think of one right off the bat, but they would be smaller national entities. So he's saying every single nation on earth is going to be shaken. If it had some place in the world economy, if it had some place in that pecking order of the nations, every nation was going to be uprooted and removed from the place that it occupied. And it clarifies it. It says, then the kings of the earth and the eminent people and the commanders and the wealthy and the strong and every slave and free person hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the sight of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath is come, and who is able to stand? All right, so not only is there this great darkness falling upon the earth, the wicked specifically, that's part of the context we maybe didn't introduce, not the righteous, but the wicked especially. Notice how it equalizes everybody, from the kings of the earth, the free people, the slaves, the eminent people, the military people, the wealthy, every single system. And that's what these represent. They represent governments. They represent economic systems. They represent military systems. They can even represent religious systems. And those among those systems who are unrepentant, they're so entrenched in their wickedness that they're looking for more darkness. They're saying, hide us from the sight of him who sits on the throne. It says, from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come. Who's able to stand? And by the way, remember, this is one of the promises given to the Israelites, that when you get ready to go into the land, nobody's going to be able to stand before you, period. So this is something that characterizes the commentaries about the birth pangs of Messiah, that even though they're intensely troubled times, they're scary times, they're uncertain times, they're times of poverty, famine, and sword. Nevertheless, if the old systems, and I know we've talked about what Babylon is before, it's systems. And we'll go through that. I don't know if it'll be tonight or tomorrow, but we will go through again. What is Babylon? What is the mystery of Babylon? It's been present since the garden. It hasn't changed much since the garden. It's just that there's more people within the system. But those systems have to be destroyed before he will restore. And as we read it in English, it'll say a new heavens and a new earth. It's actually, yes, it is a new thing. It's not a brand new thing, but it will be a new thing compared to how the heavens and the earth have been ruled up to the point of the days of Messiah. In order for the days of Messiah to come, he basically has to clear every system off the table. And what that amounts to is our having not even a penny in our pockets. Not even a penny in our pockets. He will destroy every system. There won't be a weapon in your hand. There won't be a penny in your pocket. Everything he has to take off of the table if it's going to be truly new. If it's going to be new and renewed and fresh and clean and holy and pure, if we're going to start from scratch again, then everything else has to go. You don't keep stuff around that's never going to follow that path of repentance, so to speak, in order to acknowledge that Elohim, he is the creator, and there is none other than he. So let's look at this unripe fig. It's also referred to as a young fig or an unformed fig. And the Midrash to this clarifies what the ancients understood an unripe or an unformed fig to be, because we're interested in it. It just says, the stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its unripe figs. Well, if you've been through Creation Gospel Workbook 1, you know who the stars of the sky are. It's people, the descendants of Abraham. There will be descendants of Abraham who will be shaken out of their place by a great wind, by a great ruach. Why? Because they never formed. And so they say the fig tree represents the nation of Israel. For as the unripe figs mar the flavor of the figs as a whole. And remember, back then they would compress multiple fig fruits into one fig cake. That's how they would preserve it. That the figs were a food that you could preserve through the winter. And often the kings, if they wanted to give gifts to their subjects, they would give them cakes of figs. And so if you put the unripe figs, if you mix those into those fig cakes, then it says you mar the flavor of the figs as a whole. And so they say, so too, the sinners of Israel mar the nation as a whole. And these young fruit allude to the sinners of Israel who died in Egypt during the 3 days of thick darkness. Now, when we read this in the Song of Songs, it's not as though they just read John's revelation and wrote this. This is something being written independently of any background in the New Testament. This is something that is advanced long before probably John had his revelation in the New Testament. So in John's background, would he have known this? Probably. If the Holy One's going to speak to us, he usually uses things we understand. He doesn't, necessarily introduce things that are so unfamiliar to us that we would never figure it out. Probably in John's mind, when he sees the unripe figs, the stars of heaven like unripe figs, that makes perfect sense to him because it's been in their understanding, probably for hundreds of years. So he sees this, and his mind would think, oh my goodness, these people are technically part of Israel, but they are unformed. They're unripened. And he would equate this with the preparation to leave Egypt. Because the way the rabbis are reading this, and I know we had a lesson on it a couple years ago about the wording of the plague of darkness, but it's thought that it wasn't just Egyptians who suffered during this plague, that there were actually Israelites who died in that thick darkness. And they had a specific identity. It comes from Exodus 10:22. It says, there was a thick darkness throughout the land of Egypt for a 3-day period. No man could see his brother, nor could anyone arise from his place. And so they're looking at the Hebrew text there, and I used yellow highlighter there so you could focus on the words that they're focusing on. No man could see his brother. Why would that matter? Why wouldn't it just say no man could see another? Or a man couldn't see a hand in front of his face. It says, no, it's his brother he could not see. And the idea here was that there were unrepentant Israelites who didn't want to leave. And that's been one of my, sometimes Hebrews make complaints when we shouldn't. And one of the complaints I've had is that as wondrous as Israel is and all the things we know about it, there's some people, if you gave them an all expense paid trip to the land, they wouldn't go. We're not leaving here. They're waiting on some sort of late bus with Messiah or something. They're completely disregarding that Joshua and Caleb, the only 2 people who brought back a good report of the land, were the only ones that got to go back. That there is a principle there. It's a special place. And there is a spiritual connection that occurs when you go there. I don't get ranking Disneyland and Epcot Center and Six Flags and the Grand Canyon and all of these things on your vacation list, and the land of Israel never making it onto that list of places to take your family, even if it's to go 1 by 1, or 2 by 2. It's like it just never enters people's mind. And I think it's entered their minds more now that you haven't been able to get in. It looks like that's going to open up a little bit at the end of the year, the best I can tell. But then I think as the economy crashes, it's going to be more of a question of who can even afford to go. It used to be a matter of, can I afford to go, or do I have the vacation time to go? And then we were just cut off. It's like, doesn't matter if you got the money or the time, you can't get in. And then as it opens up, I think there's going to be more conditions that are going to keep numbers low. At any rate, they say there were people in Egypt who, in spite of the slavery, they say these were likely the collaborators, those who were kind of the go-betweens between the Israelites and the Egyptians. And they didn't want to leave. They didn't want to leave those conveniences and comforts of Egypt for something they had never seen before, a place they had never been. Likely they understood basic concepts. Maybe they didn't know 613 laws of the Torah, but they definitely had some commandments that we don't always credit them for, even before the giving of the Torah. They have an understanding of the laws of Nidah. They're already practicing things like not eating the sinew of the thigh when they slaughter an animal to eat. There's already things in place, and it's likely that they have syncretized quite a bit with the Egyptians. And therefore, if they were to leave Egypt, they knew there would be a higher standard. There would be a loss of convenience. And they say these were the unformed figs who didn't want to leave Egypt. And had they remained among the other Israelites, they would have discouraged them from leaving. They would have obstructed them from leaving with Moses and Aaron. And one thing they pointed out, not just that, and one thing here is like, he couldn't see his brother. Why would he not be able to see his brother? Well, in order not to discourage them, they thought that this darkness fell so that as they're being weeded out, that it's not discouraging them, because that was the whole point. Remove from Israel what is going to discourage them from overcoming on this journey. And so this was kind of a clandestine way of removing the discouragers. And so even the Egyptians couldn't see it. Not just your brother couldn't see you being taken out, but neither could the Egyptians, so that they couldn't taunt. Again, that would have been a source of discouragement. But the other word here they're focusing on is tachat, where it says, nor could anyone rise from his place. Tachat. That's kind of an interesting word, translated into English as place. And there's other words we might expect instead of tachat. That's not a common use of that word. Let's see. I think we just went over this, that the idea that after 3 days, the Israelites who were repentant, they arose. See back here, it says no one could rise from his place for 3 days. Okay, after 3 days, they believed that those who repented arose from the darkness. It was like emerging from death. And yet a certain portion of them, their brother did not. But by using tachat here, that's what it means. It means something that is beneath you, underneath you, or below you. So rather than saying that, they didn't arise from their makom, they say they couldn't arise from what was beneath, underneath, or below. So there again, we've got 3 days of death and a resurrection prophesied right there. Will there be some who do not resurrect at the first resurrection? Revelation says yes. Revelation says you want to be part of this first resurrection, because over them, the second death will have no power. If you have to wait for the second resurrection, then it appears that the judgment is much harsher. So you would want to arise from death. You would want to arise from what was beneath you on the third day. They take it a step farther here. Tena is going to be the fig tree, and chanta, if you can read the Hebrew there, is going to has ripened. And so again, they're linking just through this word that part of the Israelites were actually harvested out in the darkness, and they did not arise from their place. They did not arise from the dead. And the connection there takes you back to Genesis 50, verse 2. When Joseph commands his servants to embalm his father, that word there for embalming, you can see I put it in the bold, chantu, which that would be the plural. But you can see it's the same shoresh. It's the same root word. So where it says that it's ripened, the hint there too is that even at the same time, you have some fruits who are ripening in the sense of forming into a full fruit, a repentant fruit. You also have a certain number who will be associated with the dead and that Egyptian practice of embalming. It's just kind of like a play on words. That's what we would call it. And so it talks about the blossoms who are emitting a fragrance. Let's go back here and look at the verse. The fig tree has ripened its fruit, and the vines in blossom have given forth their fragrance. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. All right, so the fig tree is set in the context of those 3 days of darkness, some arising and some not. But it also mentions the vines have given forth their fragrance. All right, so let's get to the vines. They say those who repented, those are the blossoms of the vines. And so when they repented, they emitted a fragrance of repentance. Just like if you were to bring a sacrifice to the altar, as that sacrifice burns on the altar, it's called a pleasing aroma. And so when you repent, in a spiritual sense at least, the Holy One, he can smell your repentance. You emit an odor when you repent. And he's likening it to this fragrance of the grapes, where they're not fully formed yet. In that sense, they are like the unripe figs, but because they're repentant, they're going to let out this fragrance, and they're saying, I promise you the deeds to come will be better than what have come up to this point. And I took a picture of our fig tree so you could see. I know it's really fuzzy, but I was trying to get it really close so you could see what I was talking about. And I took this a couple years ago, I guess. But the point is, with a fig tree, some people get upset with Yeshua because he cursed a fig tree when it says it wasn't the time for figs. That's not as drastic as it sounds, because as soon as you see the leaves, you can tell whether there's going to be a fig or not. Because with the fig tree, when the leaves emerge, so does the little fig blossom. You can literally see the unformed fruit in this picture. You can see there's one leaf that's opened, and then you can see another one closer to me that's about to open. But you can also see that little fig fruit. And so if Yeshua were to walk by and he were to see leaves on a tree, but he wouldn't see any fruits at all, he would already know this tree's not going to produce anything, because it will show itself at the same time as the leaves. And in that little passage we read in Revelation, it talked about the unripe figs and falling like leaves, falling like the fig leaves. Because in the case of the fig tree, the leaf and the fruit happen and kind of go through that process at the very same time. So early in the year, take it a step farther. Okay, yes, I see there's figs on the tree. Well, likely those first figs that you see on the tree are going to be the best. Those would be first fruit quality figs. They will form, they will become fully fruitful, they will be sweet, they will be worthy of a harvest. But there will also be some later ripening figs. And I should have picked one of those off our tree before they dropped off as an example, but didn't anticipate needing an example. But on our fig tree, those that don't come out with the first fruits and make the nice fruits, as you go back late in the summer, what you'll see is these little puny figs, and they're coming out there, and they'll do a couple of things. Some of them will just shrivel up and never make into a full fruit. They're unformed. A lot of times they'll just drop off the branch. It's like they don't have a good grip on that branch. So they'll either drop or they'll shrivel. You can pick them and try to eat them. They're just not that good. And they're much smaller. They're just not formed. And so this is part of, if you want to put this in your symbol book, that the unripe fig is representing an unrepentant Israelite, because Israel is the fig tree. So if we go by this pattern, there's a possibility that an unrepentant sinner who is an Israelite might not experience the greater Exodus. That unrepentant sinner might die in the plagues that come with the tribulation. Because in that day of darkness, when those four winds begin to blow and cause that chaos, what John sees is that their star or their light will fail in that darkness. See, if you truly have the light of the Torah, if you have that luster, then the darker it is, the brighter you'll shine, the more fixed you will be as that witness, because the stars witness to the Torah. And so if you're not fixed in your faith, then the very ruach that is supposed to bring the systems of the world to its knees might actually shake you loose. Now, am I saying you're not saved? Not saying that at all. That's not for a human being to judge. But your ability to stick and to shine in the darkness, not to fall unformed, not to try to hide from the wrath of the Lamb, because you're actually testifying to the wrath of the Lamb. If you hold your position as that star, if you hang on to that tree until you're fully ripe, then you're not going to be shaken loose. You're not going to be that puny, unformed fig. You're not going to be a withered leaf at the end of the summer. And the thing is, it's a lot of times I've noticed just from observing our fig trees, it's not that you have to shake the tree. It's not that a storm has to come through and blow those little unformed figs off. They just turn loose of their own accord. It's like overnight they shrivel up and they're gone. And you have to look around in the dirt to find them if the ants haven't already carried them off. So if he sorts out the unformed figs of Israel, then what is left is that scent, that reach. See, it's the ruach, it's the spirit, the wind that shakes loose the unformed fig. But the vine, the repentant one, is emitting a scent, a reach, of repentance in the darkness. In other words, the Spirit is still working within them. The Spirit's not working against them. The Spirit is working within them. And those Israelites are the ones who are going to arise from the shackles of sin. They're going to arise from Egypt. They're going to arise from Babylon. And we're going to contrast that too, where Egypt is figurative of death in a place called Abaddon, the realm of the lost. There's going to be another component symbolized by Babylon. So you've got Egypt, death, being lost. And then we'll look at Babylon as this place of not just confusion, but again, it's such a heavy symbol in the book of Revelation as the beast. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about Babylon. It's the first beast kingdom. Any kingdom that emerged on that idol, on that image of the beast that Nebuchadnezzar built, is still part of the same beast. It's one figure. Might be different metals, different kingdoms, but it is still part of Babylon. And then, of course, you know from the lessons we did summer before last, we traced how the serpent gave his authority to the beast, how Egypt transferred its authority to Babylon, so that the earth itself, the serpent, his dominion was not the earth. His dominion was the water. If he wants to spread his influence over the earth, then he has to transfer some of that authority to the beast kingdoms so that they will execute his will upon the earth. Okay, here's our passage from Isaiah 34. And this should sound a whole lot like what we just read in Revelation 6. It says, "Come near, you nations, to hear, and listen, you peoples. Let the earth and all it contains hear, and the world and all that springs from it. For the Lord's anger is against all the nations." Now, this should sound parallel because in Revelation, yes, it's about the nations and the peoples, and how certain ones are going to be terrified of the wrath, the anger of the Lamb. He says the Lord's anger is against all the nations, his wrath against all their armies. Remember, it said military commanders specifically in that list: kings, military commanders, slave, free, doesn't matter. The unrepentant ones were trying to hide in the darkness. It says he has utterly destroyed them. He has turned them over to slaughter. So their slain will be thrown out, and their corpses will give off their stench, and the mountains will be drenched with their blood. So I broke that part of the passage off so you could see the context of nations, peoples, and mountains. And not only that, later as we get into Matthew 24, Yeshua will make a very specific statement. He will say, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Well, right here, we understand what Yeshua was talking about, that the slain of the nations, of the peoples, is going to be thrown out. And then it says their corpses will give off their stench. And then Yeshua says that's where the vultures are going to gather. And then I want you to see the passage highlighted here or in bold print that most closely parallels what we read in Revelation. It says all the heavenly lights will wear away, and the sky will be rolled up like a scroll. All its lights, okay, in Revelation, we heard them called stars. In Isaiah, he calls them heavenly lights. All its lights will also wither away as a leaf withers from the vine, or, see, he's bringing up the vine again, just like we read about in Song of Songs. We've got the fragrance of the vine, You've got the fig tree beginning to bud. Well, he says, in this case, there will be lights who wither away as a leaf withers from the vine, or as one withers from the fig tree. Okay, to a Jewish mindset, this is screaming to us, these are Israelites. These are people who had a heavenly light. These were witnesses. They had a place in the sky. And because they would not repent, they are going into that category of an unformed fig, or the leaf that falls off the fig tree. And then he goes on, he says, for my sword has drunk its fill in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon Edom and upon the people whom I have designated for destruction. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It drips with fat, with the blood of lambs and goats, and with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Botzra, and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. Right. So the first passage, you've got a context for it. You just read that in Revelation. The second part of the passage, you've got context. You just read that in Revelation. Now you're looking at the third passage saying, okay, where does it talk about Edom and Botzra in John's Revelation? If the Song of Songs is prophesying of the resurrection, but also cautioning me that there will be some who won't arise at that first resurrection. Of course, I don't want to be in that number. I want to be in that number when the saints go marching in, right? Where does Edom come into the equation? Edom is the beast. You just have to kind of transfer it. And what about Botzra? We'll get to Botzra here in just a second. But this is just a review. I know we've got some new students in class who haven't seen this before or been through that explanation. So you can go back in the videos and you can find probably 2 or 3 lessons that'll explain this more clearly. But for everybody else, this is just a refresher of the 4 beast kingdoms and then the daughters of Rome, represented by the mixed iron and clay feet. So we know that Egypt, or Pharaoh, passed that authority to Babylon. Remember, he made that last desperate attack upon Babylon, was defeated badly, and had to kind of slither back to Egypt, and Egypt never regained its world power. That power was passed off to Babylon at that point. And then from Babylon, you've got the Medes and the Persians, and then you have the Greeks, and then you have the Romans, and then finally you have these daughters of Rome. And there's a couple of religions, especially, that are considered daughters of Rome. And the explanation is that they can mingle like these clay feet, but they cannot marry. They can never become one. We'll just avoid saying the names so that we don't get just kicked off of YouTube too fast. So in Revelation, we know Babylon is the golden head of the beast. He is the first image of the beast kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar literally formed a statue for people to bow down to. In fact, he invited all the nations, representatives from all the nations, to come bow down to his beast statue. And so when we get over to Revelation, Babylon is still there. The beast kingdom is still there. And then we see this woman riding the scarlet beast, who's also known, at least in the Jewish literature, referred to as the red one. So if you see the red one somewhere, that's Rome or Edom. And of course, Edom, it means red, comes from Esau. And so when we see this woman riding a scarlet beast, or the red one, what she's actually doing is showing you how she has been embedded with every world system, from Babylon to the Medes and the Persians to the Greeks, all the way down to the red one, which is Rome. And then we have these mingled daughters of Rome. There are systems derived from Rome. And if you don't believe that, just try to remember what you had to learn in English class in high school. You had to learn their mythology. Latin, it's still showing up. It's that influence is still there, but the influence goes all the way back to Babylon. It just simply, each kingdom's qualities were simply passed to the next kingdom of the beast. And so when that serpent lost his feet, going back to the garden, he had to figure out a way to walk among the nations and rule them. Because if he could rule Israel, then he could also prevent them from returning to their inheritance in the garden. He definitely coveted to rule over that territory, not just over humankind. So what we just read in Isaiah 34 is giving us context for these falling stars and the figs with the fall of Botzra and Edom. And they're the same geographic location. Any of you guys who have been down to Tamar with us or driven down to Eilat, you've driven right through it. If you've stayed with us at Tamar, if you go outside at night and kind of get away from the lights of the building and look over the mountains of Jordan, you can literally see the lights of Petra and Botzra. It's the same area. And also, if you've been there, you know that it's on this ancient spice route that went through Petra and Botzra. Comes up from Yemen. It's going to continue on either to the Mediterranean or to Egypt, or it'll take a turn up north toward what would be Tyre and Sidon, which of course they were the great seafaring traders. So the trade network, Botzra, we know it as Petra. Again, you're talking about the same geographic location. They're in the same area. And that was the headquarters of the Nabateans. And the Nabateans were a people, their entire civilization depended upon commercial trade. If you've ever been around that area, you know they weren't doing much gardening. They did a little, they could. They had systems of diverting water and so forth, but they were never going to be able to subsist on gardening where they lived. They relied entirely on commercial trade for their economy. And when they were in any kind of power, they would tax every good or every service that passed through their kingdom on that spice route. So as you're looking at Babylon in the book of Revelation, and you're seeing how careful John is to record all these commercial products that are passing through Babylon, and how the merchants of the earth are mourning over the loss of this commercial trade with Babylon. You can trace that all the way back to the first beast kingdom. You can trace it down to the present beast kingdom, which is a mingled daughter of Rome. So as John sees this scarlet beast, as he's seeing these associations with Babylon, John sees his own generation. See, John's generation looked at Rome and said, that's the red one. That's part of the beast kingdoms that Daniel prophesied of. Daniel told us about this. This is the red one. This is why they were pressuring Yeshua so hard to just stand up and be king and get rid of the beast, to get rid of the red one. But that system of taxation, that system of harsh rule, it connected the first beast kingdom, Babylon, with John's beast kingdom, which would have been Rome. And what the Romans did, they came in, they took over the Nabateans' taxation outposts on this spice route. And here's a picture of one as you go up to Scorpion's Ascent from Tamar. From this point, they're going toward Judea. If they took that turn instead of turning toward Egypt, well, this was just an outpost to collect taxes as the ancient caravans passed by. It's about taxation. It's about a commercial system. On the right is Tamar. If you look forward from Tamar, you can see the mountains of Jordan or Moab. Right over those mountains, you're looking at Petra and Botzra from right there. So there's a connection here. When we look at, let's see, that's too much to get into with the time we got left. When we look at Botzra and Edom being mentioned in this same context, then we know that Isaiah is pointing out to us that there is a economic commercial system that is going to be designated for destruction. And none of this is disconnected. He's actually connecting it all for us. So when we look in the book of Revelation and then we start to read about things that we know would affect the economic systems of the entire world, when we look at the famine, when we look at the plague, which is about to bring down, just taking the people out of the workforce who don't want to take the vaccination, that alone could crash the whole thing. But there's way more than that. It's been piling up. And so it's going to finally reach a point where they say the straw that broke the camel's back. The camel's going down. And so he's saying the footsteps of Messiah, you're going to know the footsteps of Messiah because you're going to start to see shaky believers shaken off. You're going to see the nations, the peoples experience the wrath of the Lamb. And one way you can know that these are the footsteps of Messiah is that he will absolutely destroy the economic systems of the world. A system that is going to go from Babylon in ancient times all the way up to the present time, where we're living among the systems of the daughters of Rome. And that I guess we'll have to tie it together until tomorrow, where we can expand on that, because it gets a little more involved after that. So I'm going to put a place marker right there to remind me that's where we start tomorrow.